Hello and welcome to Next Economy Now. My name is Shawn Berry and I'm a partner at Lift Economy. Lift Economy is an impact consulting firm whose mission is to create, model, and share a locally self-reliant economy that works for the benefit of all life. On this podcast, we highlight the leaders who are taking a regenerative, bioregional, democratic, diverse, transparent, and whole systems approach to using business as a force for good. Today, I'm delighted to have Omar Freilla on the show. Omar is the founder and coordinator for Green Worker Co-ops in the South Bronx, where they run the Coop Academy to empower a new generation of small local businesses that are cooperatively owned and operated. I first met Omar in 2004 after the founding of the United States Federation of Worker-Owned Cooperatives when he came to visit me at my woodworking co-op in San Francisco. It's been a pleasure to see his work grow and develop over the years, and delighted to have him on the show today. Welcome, Omar.
Thank you, Shawn. Thanks for having me on.
It's a pleasure, always. So I'd love to start with hearing about your story and your background and what you've been through to get to this point where you are today.
Sure. So I grew up and live in the Bronx, in the South Bronx. I came to the cooperative movement, new economy movement, coming from the world of social justice, anti-racist, community organizing, particularly the environmental justice movement. I've been involved in lots of community fights in the South Bronx and throughout New York City, pushing so that communities that wind up being the ones that shoulder the burdens for the rest of the country and the city actually get to have a say in what happens. So that naturally, in my own mind, and led me to cooperatives and worker cooperatives in particular, because I saw in them a way to really address a need that had been and remains dire in our communities, in low-income communities of color, like the South Bronx. And that was a need for work. It was a need for money to see wealth that remains in the community, stay in the community. And it was a need to really have a say in the institutions of our lives. So that principle resonated with me coming out of the environmental justice movement, where the principle of it's people on the ground who wind up getting the burdens, who wind up dealing with the impacts of the way that our society operates, the pollution generated. Those are the communities that really deserve a say in what happens in their own governance. So that principle translates easily to the worker co-op world, where it's about one worker, one vote. And if you're the one that's actually generating the wealth, you should have a say in the governance of that business.
Beautiful. So, and you have a background in environmental science, right? A master's degree. So
yes, that's right.
Reasons that, maybe something about environmental responsibility. Why or what is the connection between, co-op, one worker, one vote, and environmental responsibility, or is there one?
Well, I see there's definitely one. A great way to see it play out is to really look at, to really look at how it plays out on the ground within an actual business. One of my first real introductions to cooperatives occurred after I decided to dedicate myself to the creation of worker cooperatives. And that was when I had the opportunity to visit Mondragon in Spain, in the Basque region. And Mondragon, the town of Mondragon, is a global epicenter of worker cooperative activity that people know of around the world. And so I decided if I was going to start an organization to help launch and create worker cooperatives, I needed to go see what was happening in the town of Mondragon. So I went there, and one of the things that drew me was actually its history, because I found a lot of parallels between the development of Mondragon and the South Bronx. Both were areas that were decimated through years of neglect. In the town of Mondragon, they were persecuted, and following the Spanish Civil War and the rise of Franco, and they had been an area that had been neglected and bombed out. The South Bronx was an area that during the 70s and the 80s, people often described as an area that was bombed out, and for decades had been neglected. And we have slowly over the years been able to turn much of that around, but there's still a great deal of neglect that occurs. So that aspect of the history resonated with me. But when I got there, one of the things that I never heard anybody talk about, but that really struck me, was that I was standing in a town on the waterfront, on a riverfront, looking at a river in the middle of an industrial town, and it looked nothing at all like what the river in the South Bronx looked like at the time, which was the Bronx River. I could actually access the river. I could actually walk to the river, and there were trees on the river. Not, very, it didn't look like the kind of esplanade, riverfront that you would expect, say in Lower Manhattan. But it looked like an area where you knew that people cared about actually getting to the river, and that you could walk there. And there were trees there. It did not look like an inaccessible, inhospitable place that said stay away. And it didn't look like a place that was completely filled with concrete where there was no life. And that, to me, what the message I got immediately looking at that was that there were people who actually cared, and that it was strange. It struck me as strange, knowing that this was an industrial town, that this would actually be allowed to take place. What I had gotten used to here in the US and in my community was that if there's an industrial area, industry dominates all decision making. And any interest in seeing something nice that looks pretty is not in the interest of the owners of the businesses. And that's when it clicked that the owners of these businesses in this town of Mondragon live within that community. Right. Because they're the workers who are also the owners. So that's when I quickly realized that when you're looking at a way to transition an economy, or to have an economy that is actually operating in line with nature, or that's good for the environment, then it's important that the people who are making decisions be the same people that would be feeling the immediate impacts. One of the things that struck me walking into a washing machine factory was that I walked in a plant, and at one point, one of the workers asked if we noticed anything strange, if there was anything that we noticed that seemed odd. And no one could figure out what the person was talking about. And then the individual said, well, just stop for a second and listen. What do you hear? And no one, we all looked ourselves confused in that and realized we didn't hear anything. There was no clanking, no incredibly loud background noise. We could actually just have a conversation. And that also is not something that was typically seen in a factory of that size. Think of a 5,000 person factory in the United States. Wow. And what was pointed out was that you had massive machinery that is actually incredibly loud, but the worker owners of that plant made the decision that they were going to protect their own hearing. Wow. And not by requiring that the workers take individual responsibility for their hearing by wearing earplugs, but by simply putting a sound deadening device on the source of the sound in the plant. So you saw, the machinery that generated the greatest amount of noise had these domes over them. Wow. And it was a very simple thing to do. So, it brings home the point that those who make the decisions that are in their interests. And people who are directly feeling the negative impacts have an interest to protect their health, to protect their immediate community, protect the health of their neighbors. So when you have a break and you don't allow for that feedback to happen, then that's when you wind up with companies just running amok over a community or over their workers, the health of the community, the health of the planet, and the health of their workers. So worker co-ops, for me, have a very clear role to play in being able to restore that connection and implement a feedback system.
So instead of the normal kind of business as usual model of industry that we may be familiar with in the United States or South Bronx, like you're saying, where the factory owners most likely don't live in the neighborhood, right?
They definitely don't. They sometimes don't even live in the state.
Right. So they're not members of the community. They're not in the factory, so they're not necessarily concerned about the noise levels or the worker safety. So right. What you're seeing, or what you saw in Mondragon, is that when the workers are empowered as owners, they're automatically making decisions that take care of their town, their environment, and also their own safety and well-being while they're working.
Absolutely.
Yeah, right. So it's a shift in the business model that goes right to the core, right? So it's not just one solution that we get out of this. It affects almost everything.
Yeah, whenever you deal with who makes decisions, you are having impacts that extend well beyond whatever the immediate issue is. It's how we make decisions that impacts our entire lives and how we operate.
Omar, what would you say are maybe some common misconceptions just in your line of work that you hear about worker co-ops? Because at least as far as I've experienced, a lot of people don't even really know about the model or realize that it's a viable model. So I'm curious, what are some of the common misconceptions that you hear on a regular basis?
Oh yeah, I hear so many. So let's see. Worker cooperatives are nonprofit organizations.
Right.
So worker cooperatives are not nonprofit organizations. They are for-profit businesses. The distinction between a worker cooperative and a traditionally structured business is who owns the business, who's making decisions. So instead of one owner, it's all of the people who are actually working in the business, all being owners together and making decisions together. On that note, a second misconception, once people get at least to an understanding that these are for-profit businesses, second misconception is that everyone is making decisions at the same time about everything. So that is not true. People make decisions in the way that any effective organization is going to make decisions. Those who are actually involved directly, are going to have the priority in making decisions. But ultimately, the cooperative itself, the members choose who is going to be making what decisions. So in some cases, it will make sense for one or a small group of individuals to make decisions, say if it's about developing a product, but if it's a bigger decision that's going to be impacting a larger number of people, say, should the business change its mission or switch to a completely different line of business or shut down a particular operation, then that is something that workers will likely say, and he will say, we need to open that up, and that needs to be something that's made by the larger membership or somebody. So yeah, everybody doesn't make all decisions at the same time. You don't need a factory to decide what color to paint the bathroom.
Right, but the key decisions is what you're saying that everybody
Right.
will get to weigh in on.
Right, and there's also, there's a pretty broad spectrum of management or structures within a cooperative. So there are some cooperatives that look very much like a traditional business, meaning that they have a CEO, they have a board of directors, they have a CEO, they have management staff, and then they have the workers that are in the field or on the floor, on the shop floor, that are doing the day-to-day, what's seen as the day-to-day work. So you have that on one end, and then on the other end, you have what you can describe as a collective structure, where you have, say, a smaller group where they're making decisions. They generally make decisions as a group, and there's a flat pay structure, and so people are paid the same. Within that range, within those ends of the spectrum is where most worker cooperatives lie. So most worker cooperatives borrow from different ends of that spectrum to make up who they are. So those are two big misconceptions. A third misconception I'll add is that worker cooperative members are by and large white, middle class, and live in the woods somewhere in California or the Pacific Northwest.
Right.
So that is actually very far from the case. Most members of worker cooperatives are actually women of color, particularly immigrant women of color who live in the cities. That's largely because the largest worker cooperative in the United States dominates the numbers of worker co-op members. That's Cooperative Home Care Associates in the Bronx. So they've got 2,000 worker owners. And I think the worker co-op movement as a whole is probably at about 4,000 to 5,000 people. So they're a big player in that. But even there, within the past 10 years or so, there's been a pretty dramatic growth in the number of worker cooperatives led and run by people of color, particularly women of color, in cities.
Well, that's a great segue into something else I wanted to ask you. You mentioned you started off working as a community organizer, working in environmental justice. What do you see in terms of co-op development as a vehicle for environmental justice and uplifting communities that haven't had the opportunities that some other ones have?
I think worker cooperatives are a necessity for transitioning to an economy that puts people first, that takes care of the health of human communities and the planet and health across the board, and that makes a space for and centers democracy as a daily practice. Creating a space where people actually get to have a say in the basic decisions of their lives. So without worker cooperatives, let me just say that, we don't live in a country in the United States where people get to experience democracy on a daily basis.
Wait a minute, Omar, this is the greatest democracy on the planet, right? We have at least 20% of our population that votes.
Yeah, that's pretty close to right.
Once every 4 years. So
and that's considered the extent of democracy. We force our military. We throw our militaries into other countries in the name of democracy. But people here on the ground, we don't practice it. It's democracy for most people is the extent of being able to vote every 2 years or 4 years in an election. And most people, as you pointed out, don't even do that. Less than 50% of the people of the electorate actually voted in the United States. And even that, you look at the fact that most people, are not even able to vote. A quarter of the population that is eligible to vote, or was eligible to vote, is not eligible to vote at any point in time because they've been incarcerated or their rights have been taken away for vote because they've been previously incarcerated. So fewer and fewer people actually are having the opportunity to exercise the semblance of democracy that we have.
So what do you mean by democracy happening more frequently in a co-op? Like what does that look like?
Well, democracy is not just an election. Democracy is being able to make decisions over your life. And working people spend most of our lives at work. You're either at work or you're sleeping. That's where we spend most of our time. So when we walk into our workplaces, most people walk into not a democracy, but a feudal relationship,
right?
Where there is, the owner or the boss is the person who they have to provide their labor to. Right. There are no rights. Most people at work as at-will employees. So there are some very basic labor law protections, but by and large, you can be removed at will. That's the definition of an at-will employee.
Right. At any moment.
Yeah, you can be removed at any moment. So so that's just what you can actually do to stay. That just speaks to your ability to actually show up for work every day.
So that's not democratic. That's more of like a fear-based environment. You better perform or you're getting cut out.
Right. Exactly. And there's no room there, or very little room for shared decision making.
Right.
It's the enlightened boss that gets high praises from their employees that actually involves employees in decision making.
Right.
It's the boss that everyone loves. But the adulation around those kinds of owners or bosses is the exceptions. They're the exceptions that justify the rule.
Right.
So, if we have workplaces that actually flip that and are workplaces where people are actually able to make decisions, then you're really allowing for people, the growth of people who actually exercise that muscle of democracy. Just having a say, being able to have a say and exercising that say is a practice. It's a practice that enables people, empowers people. It enables them to grow in their own development, to be more confident in who they are. And it's for that very same reason that if you look at, in any community, it's when people become engaged in any kind of organized group where they get some leadership role, where they're able to grow in that leadership role. And they become people who wind up becoming more confident. They take greater roles in their community outside of that particular organization. And cooperatives in particular serve as breeding grounds for that. There's an author, Jessica Gordon-Nemhart, who is also a member of our board at Green Worker Cooperatives. She's a professor at John Jay College here in New York City. She's written an excellent book called Collective Courage: History of African American Cooperative Economic Thought. And she highlights how many of the early civil rights leaders, so A. Philip Randolph, Ella Jo Baker, and a number of other people got their start within cooperatives and Black mutual aid associations. So these were the economic institutions in their communities where people were able to come together and make decisions around their economic fate. And through that process, gain leadership skills that allowed them to step out even further and have a greater impact on their community. So that's that day-to-day democracy that I'm talking about. You provide people with the opportunity to make decisions over their lives on a daily basis over the things that matter. That extends to everything else.
So instead of looking to political leaders to provide solutions the way forward, this is a different approach. This is a grassroots, decentralized grassroots, local empowerment approach to actually create democratic experience on a daily basis. That's going to affect not only those individuals, but it's going to spread out to their communities.
Absolutely. That's the way it works.
So Omar, this is wow, what a powerful moment in history, right? You were here early December 2016. We got some craziness happening in politics and economics, and what are your reflections on this pivotal moment in history, and how do you see your work contributing to a solution?
Well, I see our work as more vital now than it even was a year ago. That, I think of the rise of Donald Trump as, this is the last stand for white supremacy, the last stand for far right, for an economy that is hell bent on environmental destruction. This is ironically, and I say this is a last stand because this is a reaction. This has been a reaction to people becoming much more open of each other, or accepting of each other, of differences, and having an economy that has been moving towards, though slowly, extremely slowly, towards alternative sources of energy, or renewable energies. I see the work that we're doing as more central, more vital and important now than it has ever been, particularly because the work, we are facing with the rise of Donald Trump as president of the United States, and all of the whole cast of villains basically that he's assembled around him in a cabinet and as advisors. We're seeing people who are hell bent on turning back the clock and undoing progress that has happened. But I hold the view that as Dr. King had said, the arc of history is long, but it tends toward bent towards justice. And so what we're seeing now with the rise of Trump is basically white supremacy's last stand, an attempt to regain and hold on to what little it has, and what it has been able to hold on to. And so we're going to see the next 4 to 8 years is going to be extremely tough, but this is also going to be the time that if we are to get beyond it, it's going to require doubling down on the things that are actually, on the things that are really about meeting people's needs and our dreams, and including what our economy looks like, which was a primary issue that was raised during the campaign. The things that the cooperative movement is built on are the same things that people across the country, including many Trump supporters, were demanding. Whether it's people who are on Trump's side or people who are going for Bernie Sanders, like everyone across the board was really wants to see a dramatic change in what our economy looks like. And worker cooperatives and cooperatives in general are an answer to that. What our economy looks like is about, what people are demanding is an economy that really is centered on people and what our communities can actually become, and just giving us the freedom and the space to make decisions and be able to meet our own needs. So I see the work that we're doing as central. This is work that is about building what the alternative is, so that when we're looking, 8 years out, 4 years out, what is it that we can say that we're going to move towards? If there's there's either going to be something that is much more attractive than the mess Donald Trump will have created, or there isn't. And if there isn't, then we're getting more of the same. And that's not a world that I want to live in.
So do you see the opportunity then for these co-op models to actually gain more traction and maybe to gain a wider recognition as win-win solution sets?
The co-op model is one that has been around and that people have always been able to look at. I think, when times are hard, that is when cooperatives become more attractive to a larger slice of the population. So we saw within the co-op movement, we saw a rise in interest since 2010. Since the economy tanked in 2008, we started seeing the real impacts and repercussions on a broad scale. After 2008, by 2010, and since 2011, we had the Occupy movement, and so cooperatives have been a central or a key feature of what a new economy would look like that people across the country have been looking towards. So interest in cooperatives has grown since then. We've seen interest in worker cooperatives here in the Bronx and throughout the New York City growing since then. We've been able to ride that and have actually been able to grow that, and now have New York City, which for the past 3 years has invested a total at this point of $5.6 million into worker cooperative development. And other cities around the country are starting to follow suit, either passing co-op-friendly legislation, taking co-op-friendly initiatives at local city agencies, or investing directly in cooperative development. I expect that over the next few years, under a Trump presidency, that is going to be even harder to do. Where federal funding we don't expect that. We don't expect federal funding to be moving in that direction, presidency. But I do expect that many cities and counties and some states even will make the push even more so, trying to attempt to declare their own independence and move in their own direction. We'll see the work that's been happening over the past few years and support local initiatives that are able to move in a different direction from what Trump is trying to do.
Well, I was hoping the New York, the co-op movement was going to come up. Can you share, because you've been involved with that, right? So what exactly, how did the funding come about? How's it structured? What's it being used for? Can you give us some more insight into that program?
Yeah, definitely. I've been, our organization, myself, we've been centrally involved in the push to get New York City, the city of New York, to embrace and support worker cooperatives. And I'm proud to say we've been successful in doing that. That process began sometime around 2014 and with pulling together many organizations around the city, coming together, most engaged in worker cooperative development, as well as some other organizations that had been engaged or are engaged in advocacy work on social justice issues broadly, and or attempting to meet social needs, so social service agencies as well, and really pushing the city of New York to move in a different direction. So we were able to influence the city council of New York to include $1.2 million towards worker cooperative development in the city's budget. And so we were able to do that in a way where funding was allocated to a set of organizations, the organizations in New York City primary organizations in New York City engaged in cooperative development for worker cooperatives. And so that was the beginning of the program, being able to direct city funding towards organizations engaged in worker cooperative development so that we could launch more worker cooperatives.
And what year was that, Omar?
This, we wound up going through in 2015.
Okay.
So this was for 2015. We're currently in 2016. So actually 2014, I'm sorry.
2014. Okay.
So it happened in 2014 for the fiscal year 2015, fiscal year 2016, and the current fiscal year 2017. City fiscal year operates differently from our calendar year. So for the past 3 fiscal years, we've gotten city money, 1.2 million, and repeat of 1.2 million, and then another 2.3 million, basically, for worker cooperatives.
And totally unprecedented, right? We don't see that anywhere else in the country, right? New York's really leading the way on that.
this was the first time that a city had invested so much money in worker cooperatives. 1.2 million was unprecedented. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Wonderful. And so what are we seeing? What are the results so far? I mean, it's going to be early days because it's a slow development, but I'm curious where we've gotten so far.
Yeah, we've seen, major, it has definitely changed the landscape for worker cooperatives in New York City. We see dramatically more worker cooperatives. In 2014, there were about 21 worker co-ops in New York City. Today, there are approximately 70.
Whoa.
So we've tripled the number of worker cooperatives in New York City, and New York City is now has actually the largest number of, it's the largest concentration of worker cooperatives.
Finally took it over from the Bay Area. That's great.
Yeah, that's what we're going for.
Nice,
But,
I like it.
Certainly, the Bay Area has a much longer history of worker cooperatives, and the cooperatives that exist there are much stronger because they've been around longer.
Yeah.
Though we are working to continue to grow the worker cooperatives in New York City, both in numbers and in size. So, a key to that is really, it's been the financial support for the cooperative development organizations that have been helping to grow the co-ops, both in size and in numbers. And so we've been seeing that. It's also been extremely helpful to have the backing and the support of the city, because we've been able to work closely with the Department of Small Business Services, which prior to the city initiative, really, worker cooperatives were not on the city's map. It was not on the map of the Department of Small Business Services. Right. And now we've gotten them to actually produce materials that are geared towards worker cooperatives and inform people through their website and through info sessions at some of their small business centers that worker cooperatives are an option. So things have been changing for the better. And, once people are aware of worker cooperatives, then they're actually able to make the decision about whether they want to go that route or not. But if they don't even know, then there's no way for cooperatives to grow.
Well, and speaking of growing co-ops, can you tie in your work with Green Worker Co-ops and Coop Academy?
Yes. So a few years back, we decided that we were going to focus our development approach on creating a way for anybody who wanted to start a worker co-op to be able to do it without having to have a huge amount of capital behind them, and without having to bust their heads against the wall, in order to start
the hard way on their own, like
yes, exactly. Most businesses fail. We know that. Most businesses fail because business owners really don't get what business they're actually in until it's too late, if they ever even get that far. And so they make lots of mistakes along the way, certainly in terms of management, but basically whether or not people actually want to buy what they're selling, period.
Yeah,
so
the basic strategy.
So we started a few years back. We started something we call the Coop Academy, which is basically, we took the approach of, let's create a school for people who want to start up worker cooperatives. And so it's for teams of people, so a team of at least 2 people who have an idea for a business and want to do it as a worker cooperative. And so we work with them over the course of 5 months to develop their business model, help them identify what business they're actually in, test their ideas, talk to potential customers, and work through it. And once they've got that business model that's solid and tested, we bring in the attorneys to incorporate the business, work with them on creating a work plan for the year ahead, and then work with them after that to actually get customers and sell.
So with this Co-op Academy, I'd love to hear, what are some of the successes you've had along the way?
Yeah, so we've seen through our approach that we're able to reach many more people, launch more cooperatives at a faster rate than we had before. We were using an approach of attempting to start one cooperative at a time. Right. So we've now in the past total of 5 years, 4.5 years or so that we've been doing the Co-op Academy, we've got 20 worker cooperatives that are in operation, that are moving their business ahead. We've got cooperatives that have been able to grow. In one case, there's a cooperative called Caracol Interpreters Cooperative. These started out as 3 women who are doing freelance work, making about $20 an hour, working maybe once every other week at a weekend, interpreting at a conference or something like that. They are now a team of 12 who are earning approximately $80 an hour, and they've basically got work every single day of the week, within the cooperative. And they've been able to, they basically do the interpretation and translation for many of the nonprofit, social justice oriented organizations in New York City, and have even done interpretation for the president of Ecuador, as well as Al Jazeera. So they've been able to grow their business extremely well, and so they've been operating now for about 3.5 years.
I got to experience them at the Co-op conference in New York, where they did the full simulcast of Spanish and English for the whole conference. I was really impressed. It was great. Yeah,
they're great. Highly recommend them. We've also got we've got a cooperative that just recently completed. They just completed a Coop Academy last February called Ometeo. They are domestic violence survivors who make beautiful upcycled jewelry. And they've launched their business and are now going to be selling through Eileen Fisher, the upscale brand designer, and with a specialty in green designs at their store beginning this month. So next week they're going to be a featured artist for the month, and their jewelry is going to be available through the Eileen Fisher catalog. And so that's just within a few months of them launching. So we're really excited for them and all of the other cooperatives that are going through our academy now.
Wow. So Omar, looking back on your experience and history as a co-op developer, what stands out to you as some of the best practices that you could share for co-op development?
Well, one is people being fully invested and being the members, I should say, the members of the cooperative being fully invested and being the driving force of their cooperative, and knowing that they are their cooperative. And so them being in decision making from the very beginning as a best practice. Another is being very clear that this is a business. And so it's vital that it survives and grows as a business, not discounting any of the social justice values that many who come to worker cooperatives are jumping in with. But too often there isn't a clear conception of business practices. And so for many people, one of the biggest hurdles is, particularly in low-income communities, is being able to value our own labor and being able to put a price tag on that and asking for that price. And so, that's a big jump for people to make.
So I hear it as confidence, right? And this kind of goes back to the point at the beginning of providing a democratic experience where these people come out as leaders in their community.
Yeah, absolutely. And confidence is at the root. Most people, I talk to lots of people about forming a cooperative. Most people do not wind up going that route, and it really has very little to do with not being attracted to co-ops as an idea. Very, very rarely do I run into people, and there are some who flat out say, I have no interest in starting a business with other people. I want to be the boss. There are some people who say that. Most people, though, for most people, it's fear. It's a lack of confidence in their own ability. Most people that I run into actually like the idea of a worker cooperative. There's just fear about their ability to actually make the business happen. Not so much about working with other people, right, but do they have the ability to actually make the business happen? So that's why for us, we use a very intensive approach of going out, having people go out and actually talking to their potential customers to really get in their heads and figure out what people actually want. So they're not making the mistake that most business owners, most business entrepreneurs make of thinking that they know what the customer wants and then create a product and wind up seeing that no one actually buys it, or not enough people buy it to pay your bills.
Right. Classic mistake. They're designing for their own interest rather than seeing if there's a real market there.
Absolutely.
So Omar, what do you see for the future? Maybe 25, 50, 100 years in the future? What do you see yourself doing? Green Worker Co-ops, Co-op movement?
100 years? Did you seriously say 100 years?
I did. We got to take the long view, right? Otherwise, you mentioned the long arc, bending towards justice.
This is true. So, it's tough. 25 years, I hope that our work, the work that we're doing and the work of many others will continue to grow, and that we will be able to, we'll be successful in creating alternatives that eventually are able to build enough steam to become a powerful force in this country. That hope is tempered though by the fact that beyond Trump, we are looking at the growing inevitability of climate change, which is already happening, and that times are going to be incredibly much tougher than they are now. And we're going to see some growing environmental catastrophes, relocation of people, massive displacement around the world. So that really gives me a lot of reason to pause. So I don't know what the future is going to look like 100 years from now. From everything that we know of what the consensus is in the scientific community, we know it's going to be a lot hotter. That's for sure. We know, there's the hurricanes will be much stronger, in some parts of the world, that environmental disasters are going to be stronger, but we don't know, it may be growing things in places that we didn't know, and massive starvation in other parts of the country, of the world now. But what that actually looks like on the ground for people's day-to-day lives, I have no idea. All that we can do is really do as much as we can to make things better now and for the future. And hopefully that will lead to changes for the better sooner rather than later.
I'm with you on that. We just do our best, we can at this moment, right? Well, Omar, I'm so appreciative of the work you're doing and for taking your time with us today. Any final thoughts for our listeners as we close out?
Well, I'd love for everybody listening to become actively involved in the growth and development of worker cooperatives. So in addition to any other work that people are doing, but if you hear about worker cooperatives, share it with others. There's an opportunity to get your city, your state, or your county to endorse and support worker cooperatives. Do it. If there isn't, help make it happen. Invest in worker cooperatives, invest in the organizations that are helping to champion and grow worker cooperatives, and basically do everything that you can to support the alternatives that are out there.
Absolutely. And
including Omar, visiting our website.
Yeah, please. I was going to ask, how can people get a hold of you?
So you can, we're on Facebook, we're on Twitter. We are certainly on the web at greenworker.coop is our website. The .coop is for anyone involved in the cooperative world, cooperative movement. Greenworker.coop. You can visit us on Facebook. You can check us out and follow us on Twitter. We're at our Twitter handle is Green Worker Co-op.
Great. Well, thanks again, Omar, and we look forward to seeing you continue to churn out these co-ops with the good work you're doing.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
All right. Take care.